to speak loudly. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Deborah Levy-Fritz. We're so glad you came out tonight on this Monday night. I am the chair of the Tikkun Olam Council here at Temple Shalom and a past president of the Temple. I'm also very, very proud to be a life and past board member of the National Council of Jewish Women. Greater Dallas section, yay!
And I'm Peggy Papper, the VP of Public Affairs for the Dallas section of NCJW. We are thrilled to see so many people here for this evening's important panel discussion.
Our discussion tonight, should we worry Christian nationalism in our schools, came about because of concerns shared in our respective NCJW and Temple Shalom communities with the passage of the Chaplain Bill. One recent example of the Texas legislature's and activists' interjection of faith into our public schools. While work occurred in our faith communities on this Chaplain Bill, concerns have continued to grow, and we wondered together, should we be worried? Thanks to a member of NCJW and Temple Shalom, Jane Lackman, and the need for this event that we were hearing in general, right, to explore the issues with experts from our community, that just came to our attention. So thank you, Jane, for advocating for us to take up this important issue.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Now we'd like to introduce you to NCJW board member, the newest senior rabbi, where is she? Of Shearith, Israel, there you are, and moderator for tonight's program, Rabbi Shira Wallach.
So I have just two quick reminders, everybody. So please jot down your questions. Everyone should have gotten an index card. If for some reason you lost it, don't have it, we'll hand one out to you. We will collect those toward the end of the discussion. And should anyone need to avail themselves of the restrooms, they are through the gathering space, with the doors to the right when you come out of the chapel, and through the exit sign. So again, thank you for joining us, for your interest and incredible attendance on a Monday night. And thank you for guiding us through the evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Terrific. Fantastic. All right, thank you for having me. And now it's my job to introduce to you our esteemed panelists. So first, we want to bring to the stage Amanda Tyler. She is Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, leading the organization as it upholds the historic Baptist principle of religious liberty, defending the free exercise of religion and protecting against its establishment by government. The author of How to End Christian Nationalism, which was published in October. And you're on a book tour now, right? Yeah. That's so exciting. Yeah, this one's green. Okay, so Amanda Tyler is also the co-host of the podcast Respecting Religion. Tyler's constitutional law analysis and advocacy for faith freedom for all has been featured by major news outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS News, ABC News, CNN, and MSNBC, and she has testified before Congress on religious liberty and Christian nationalism. A graduate of Georgetown University and the University of Texas School of Law, she lives in Dallas with her husband and son. Please give a warm welcome to Amanda Tyler. Next, we welcome to the stage David R. Brockman, PhD. He is a religious studies scholar and Christian theologian, and he serves as the non-resident scholar at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. He also teaches religious studies courses at TCU. He is a frequent contributor to the Texas Observer, Religion Dispatches, Preachy, and other publications. For the Baker Institute, Brockman has written several scholarly analyses on Christian nationalism and church-state issues, including Religious Imbalance in the Texas Social Studies Curriculum, Analysis and Recommendations, a study of religious coverage in the Texas Social Studies Curriculum, and that was 2016. Also, Christian Americanism in Texas Politics since 2008, which was published in 2020, and the Texas Legislature's Assault on Church-State Separation in Schools, which was published this year. Brockman and his spouse live in Fort Worth. Please give a warm welcome. And finally, Dr. Charles Luke has over 30 years in business development, faith-based nonprofit, and education-related work. A former Texas public school superintendent, Dr. Luke is a strong advocate for education throughout the state of Texas. He is the founder and director of the Coalition for Education Funding, a group of over 85 public school districts, the co-founder of the Southeast Texas Education Coalition, the co-director of Pastors for Texas Children, which is a statewide public education advocacy group, and the coordinator for the Coalition for Public Schools, which is a public school advocacy coalition, including 40 of the state's largest school advocacy organizations. In addition, Dr. Luke is a past member of the Board of Directors of Volunteers of America, the Fort Worth's Mayor's Faith-Based Cabinet, the Faith Advisory Committee of the Child Welfare League of America, the Board of Directors of the Veterans Coalition of Tarrant County, and the Advisory Board of Helping Restore Ability in Arlington, Texas, and the Board of the Bexar County Education Coalition in San Antonio. He currently serves as the board president of the Gemini Recovery Community in Fort Worth. Please give a warm welcome. So thank you all for being here tonight. We are really excited to learn from you and feel so privileged to share this space with you. So before we get into the good stuff, I want to hear your superhero origin stories. How did you get into this work? Was there a moment when you were hooked? How did your passion ignite for this stuff?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? If I speak, okay, at this volume, great. It's wonderful to be with you all here tonight. If I think about generally my passion for religious freedom work and church-state separation, I think about when I was a college freshman. I went to Washington, D.C. to go to Georgetown University from my home in Austin, Texas, and I had been very active in a Baptist church in my home in Austin, and I remember very clearly it was October, and some of the people from my home church had come up for a conference in D.C., and I was a college freshman, and it meant a free dinner from home. And so I met them out, and they took me to this office building where there's an organization called Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, and they said, you need to know them, and they need to know you. And now, many years later, I am leading this organization. And so I just think that moment kind of encapsulates like the work in the way that really my twin passions come together, a real commitment to my faith and my faith tradition, and also a lifelong interest in politics and government and the law, and specifically how those two things, religion and the law, can work well together to protect everyone's religious freedom.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, and like Amanda, I also would like to thank you for the warm welcome this evening, for having us, the three of us here, four of us here. When I received the list of questions here, I didn't expect this particular question. Is it too low? Okay, there we go. I didn't expect this particular question, but it gave me pause to think about something, and I reached back all the way to my childhood, okay, when I was 4 or 5 years old or something like that. I experienced a pretty fair amount of bullying when I was a kid, when I was a little kid. And I realized that I've carried the, I eventually learned how to cope with bullying, but I still carry that resentment of people who misuse power to abuse other people, to mistreat other people. And I realized that that has been kind of a theme, a kind of tacit theme in my scholarship over the years. When I went into seminary in the 1990s, I was at first a kind of evangelical Christian in a way, and thanks to some of my professors at Bright Divinity School, and including Rabbi Ralph Mecklenburger, who was one of my professors there, who used to be at Temple Bethel in Fort Worth. I learned about other religions. I learned about some of the things that we share with other religions, and I also learned about the very sad history of Christian discrimination and oppression of other religions. And one of the when I finally was working on my PhD program at SMU here in Dallas, I chose as my topic basically how a theological look at what Christianity loses when we ignore or dismiss the witness of other religions. So that was my dissertation, and that also became my first book, which is called No Longer the Same: Religious Others and the Liberation of Christianity. Okay, so you kind of get the idea there. Well, later on, and in fact, while I was teaching as an adjunct, I'd already finished my PhD, was teaching as an adjunct at SMU, teaching religion courses, including my evangelical self would have been, my old evangelical self would have been surprised to see this, but I was teaching a course on Buddhism, as well as world religion survey generally, and it shows you how much things had changed. My colleague, Mark Chansey, some of you may know Mark, very active in promoting church-state separation, so forth. He actually recruited me to do an independent examination of some of the textbooks that were being proposed for use in Texas public schools back in 2014. And I didn't know anything about that controversy. Mark had to introduce me to it. Mark had to introduce me to the concept of Christian nationalism and what the background was for all this. I got into that, I started looking at this, and I started seeing religious bullying. Okay, that is people using the system, Christian nationalists using the system to, in a sense, indoctrinate Texas kids into a particular brand of Christianity, which I don't share, a lot of Christians don't share. And from then on, my scholarly work turned from basically theology, Christian theology, over to religion and politics. So for the past decade, that's pretty much all I've worked on, and the rabbi was very kind to list some of those publications. All of them, by the way, are still available on the Baker Institute website. So you're welcome to go take a look at them. You can just Google Brockman Baker Institute, and you'll find my webpage with links to all of those. So I welcome you to take a look at those. Thank you.
Well, I have to say that I'm somewhat intimidated because I'm on the stage with a couple of esteemed authors, and I just finished my first book. I liked it so much, I think I might read another one. So, anyway, so after I left my career in stand-up comedy, I was born in and raised in North Tulsa in a little town called Turley, just outside of Tulsa, and went to an integrated high school, and that kind of changed my life because it made me see that whereas people have differences, they can come together and work toward common goals and be kind to each other. From there, I ended up becoming a fundamentalist Baptist minister started preaching when I was 17 years old, obviously no formal training. My first sermon was in the Tulsa jail, and I promise I wasn't an inmate. I came in and they sent the church that I belonged to sent me there, and so it's questionable whether or not a 17-year-old should have anything to say at all, much less be turned loose on a bunch of inmates. But I preached there, and then at 19 I accepted my first pastorate, and I pastored until I was in my 30s. Anyway, during that time, I started doing something that is the death knell for fundamentalism, and that is reading. So I actually have read more than one book. But anyway, but that changed my opinion. My theology started shifting, and it became more progressive over time. And then I finally joined a church in Lubbock that was pastored by a young man then named Charles Foster Johnson, who is the executive director of Pastors for Texas Children. And little did I know that I would meet up with him years later, and we would, work on this organization together. So during that time, I graduated from Tech. So any Tech grads here? Yep, there we go, right over there. Okay. I hesitate to raise my gun up in a church, but oh well. So anyway, but I graduated from Tech with a bachelor's in education, started teaching junior high kids, which is the Vietnam of education. And then after I survived that, barely, I went and got a master's degree in education, in educational leadership. Took a job in Mineral Wells, which is also the Vietnam of education. So that was Vietnam 2.0. And then I ended up being a principal and a superintendent. And I ended up leaving the superintendency and going to work doing what I'm doing now in 2007. And so my last superintendency was in Gainesville, Texas. But so somehow I ended up being conscripted to be the coordinator for the Coalition for Public Schools, and that's an organization that has TASA and TASB, if you guys know those, the Texas Association of School Administrators, the Texas Association of School Boards. The PTA is part of that group. Anyway, I've been doing that for a while now, over a decade, and then Charlie and I started Pastors for Texas Children around the same time, and so I started doing advocacy work in the Capitol. And I remember telling my wife, I came home one day and I said, man, I met with some important people today. I met with senators and state reps and chairmen, and all these people are important people, honey. And she said, oh, dear, everybody's important. So that's my wife, And that was I was goofy moment. But anyway, so I started doing advocacy, and what's interesting is my background as a fundamentalist Baptist preacher actually helps in conversations with some of these more conservative members of the Texas legislature, because their theology in many instances is not far from what mine was when I was 17 years old. Now, I hate to say that, and I'd hate to think that I have the same theology when I'm 63 as I had when I was 17, but some people do. They don't ever change their theology. They don't think through things. They don't read, and many times they just listen to what they're told at the service, and a lot of that is proof texted, and so they just nod and go home and go about their business, and that's where they get their faith and their beliefs about their faith. Sadly, that leads to a lot of bad policy in the Texas legislature, and so that's sort of my background story.
Thank you. All these superheroes on the stage with me. Okay, so speaking of fundamentals, but another kind, let's start from the beginning. We're going to define Christian nationalism and talk a little bit about how it's manifesting in schools.
So I guess since I've written the book, How to End Christian Nationalism, I get this topic. So here's the definition that I consistently use and find helpful for the conversation and to kind of frame what we're talking about tonight. Christian nationalism is a political ideology and a cultural framework that tries to merge American and Christian identities. It put another way, Christian nationalism suggests that to be a real American, one has to be a Christian. And not just any kind of Christian, but a Christian who holds fundamentalist religious beliefs that are often in line with conservative political priorities. And it relies very heavily on this mythological narrative of the founding of the United States and the existence of the United States as a quote-unquote Christian nation. One, not in a demographic sense, not in the sense of a majority Christian nation, but rather that the United States was founded by Christians in order to privilege Christianity in law and policy. And the problem with this narrative and this ideology, many problems. I have called Christian nationalism the single biggest threat to religious freedom for all people in the United States today, because it attacks those foundational values, those constitutional values that say the promise, I think, of the U.S. Constitution is that we all have equal belonging in American society, regardless of religion, what we believe, how we identify religiously, or even if we identify as religious or not. But Christian nationalism attacks that very premise. And I think the reason that we're all gathered here tonight is to talk about the specific threat that Christian nationalism is posing to our society through a very intentional direct assault on public education. And so I define Christian nationalism as a political ideology and a cultural framework. It is that, but it is also a highly organized and well-funded political movement. And that movement has no, more organization or funding than right here in Texas. There's a recent excellent article from ProPublica investigative journalist Ava Kaufman that ran in the New York Times Magazine just earlier this month, and I think online maybe today, about two billionaires in Texas who have, pretty much single-handedly pushed this agenda of Christian nationalism through Texas politics. And I think we're going to talk more in depth after that framing, if that's a good place to start, about what this looks like in specifics in the Texas public schools.
Test. There we go. Thank you very much. That was a really very articulate definition. Okay, so what is happening in our schools and how did we get here? I'm kind of curious, has this movement always been around? We're going back to sort of our foundational elements as a country, suggesting that because we were founded by Christians, as you were talking about, that we deserve this kind of birthright, in our country's identity. Where did this come from? Has it always been there? Has it been surging more recently, and why?
Okay, I'll take that one. Okay, we have, that's a complicated, the answer is complicated. I'll try to simplify it. There was, first of all, the Christianity was, and Protestant Christianity in particular, was definitely the dominant religion in the colonies, the American colonies. Okay, and of course there were Jewish communities, there were Catholic communities in Maryland, other places, but Protestant Christianity was definitely I don't know, probably accounted for 80 to 90% of the colonists, and that was true really up until the 1840s or so, when we began to have large Catholic immigration, and then the later 19th century when we began to have more immigration from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe and so forth. A lot of Jewish Americans came in at that time. But the United States, at the time of the founding, 1780s, early 90s, America was, generally speaking, a pretty overwhelmingly Protestant nation, but it wasn't monolithic Protestantism. There is no generic Protestantism. Okay, there were all sorts of different religious groups that differed, just as they do now, dramatically one from another. So you'd contrast, for example, the Quakers in Pennsylvania with the Congregationalists or the inheritors of the Puritan tradition up in New England. Very different theologies, very different understandings of how religion and politics should relate. Then you had Anglicans primarily in the South, places like Virginia, which became the Episcopal Church that my spouse and I are members of today. Very different traditions as well. So we had a lot of different kinds of Protestantism, as well as Jews, Catholics, and a few other religions, as well as, of course, the religious beliefs of the Native Americans that were pretty much ignored by the founders. The idea that, okay, first of all, definitely there were Christian influences on the founders, just because Christianity was kind of in the water, or it was the wallpaper at the time. But that doesn't mean that, and basically a lot of Christian nationalist pseudo-historians will use that to say they intended to create a Christian nation and that's what we should be today. Not so fast, because basically there was a deep knowledge among many of the founders, particularly Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, whom you've probably heard of, or at least seen on currency. But Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in particular, but also George Washington and Ben Franklin, John Adams, were very concerned about the danger of religious controversy and religious passions to the new republic that they were creating. They didn't want to make the same mistakes and have the same long-term bloodshed that had been witnessed in Europe with the wars between Protestants and Catholics and Protestants and Protestants and Protestants and dissenting Protestants and so on, killing each other, burning each other to stake and so on. And of course the problems that Jewish Europeans went through that whole period and earlier and then afterwards. So they wrote into the Constitution and the early documents of the country basically protections for religious belief and religious practice. So that's what we have in the First Amendment to the Constitution, the religion clauses. No establishment of religion, no prohibition on the free exercise of religion. Also, no religious test for public office. That's part of the Constitution itself. And they were criticized at the time, and this is something that Christian nationalist pseudo-historians will not mention, but they were vigorously criticized at the time by many kind of evangelical-leaning Christians for leaving God out of the Constitution, for not proclaiming that this was a nation under God, for example. It's not in the Constitution. And that was deliberate, apparently, judging from the historians that I've read. As the founding, so that's basically we have what they established was a secular state, a secular government, that basically was not neutral and certainly not negative towards religion, but actually had a positive view of religion, as in the free exercise, prohibiting interfering with the free exercise of religion. So positive view of religion, but a secular state. That's what they instituted. And that's what we still have today, supposedly. But in the second generation, as the founding generation was getting older, passing away, getting to be my age, and so on, and you had younger people coming up, there was a kind of myth of the Christian founding that began to arise. And this is documented, by the way, in an excellent book. It's a scholarly book, but it's a pretty good read. I have some of my graduate students read it. It's called Inventing a Christian America. It's by Stephen K. Green. You know that book. Excellent book that goes into the development, the creation and development, and the rationale for this myth. The idea that the documents were like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, were really shaped by the Puritans or the Pilgrims, that kind of idea, which was not historically accurate. That kind of floats along for a while, and there's a throughout the 19th century. And then after World War II, we get another surge in Christian nationalism. And this is when basically evangelical pastors, evangelical and fundamentalist pastors, and wealthy, mostly oil people, got together to try to fight what they considered communism, and the rest of us consider the New Deal, from Roosevelt's New Deal. They wanted to fight communism, and they wanted to promote the idea that we are, the America is, in contrast to the Soviet Union, a Christian nation, and so you had a resurgence of Christian nationalism at that time as kind of part of anti-communism as well. Those ideas then influenced some other folks who became instrumental in the battle over textbooks here in Texas, okay, and particularly Mel and Norma Gabler in particular. These are names you may have heard of. But they kind of started the whole textbook thing that's still going on today, trying to find communist influences in the textbooks, trying to find anti-religion, anti-Christian things in the textbooks and so on. And this basically is where we are now, and it took off, it really took off in the 1980s and 90s with the rise of the religious right in the United States, and in the cases that we're looking at in particular, with the focus of the religious right on local and state politics, a very clever move that the religious right made to take advantage of the kind of general apathy or inattention of voters to local and state politics. They were able to basically push their way into local and state politics back at that time, and it was a conscious effort to try to inject more Christianity and conservative Christianity into public education. One thing, I'll quote somebody, Cynthia Dunbar, who was a former member of the State Board of Education, said, paraphrasing her, that if you can, what today's students are taught is what's going to shape tomorrow's government. Okay, so if students are taught today that conservative Christianity, biblical Christianity is true, then tomorrow we'll have a Christian nation, essentially. That's what she's saying. If you want to go any further.
Wow.
I can go on forever on this, and you better stop me.
That was really interesting. Yep, such a helpful background. So now you've taken us to the classrooms. What's happening in schools now? There are a bunch of different directions we can go in. I mean, we're going to focus mostly on the Bible-infused curriculum proposal, but before we hone in on that, are there different kinds of tentacles, that we can actually see happening now as a result?
I'll give a kind of a frame, because I think we do have to think, before we kind of get into the weeds, have to think about this as a very coordinated effort that is nationwide, but that often Texas is kind of the testing ground for some of these awful ideas that are coming out. So one kind of nationwide program that has not yet been successful in Texas, and Dr. Luke, I think, can probably speak to this, is the pushing of vouchers for private education. So part of the overall strategy has been to defund public education. Their big goal is just to get rid of public education altogether, and if you read Project 2025, for instance, they would dismantle the Department of Education on the federal level and turn education completely over to the states. Overall, voucher programs have been really unpopular in most places because most places really want to support their public schools. And I think that's one reason it has yet to be successful here in Texas, though we have deep concerns about that, but I'll leave that. But the other piece, short of being able to totally privatize education and have public money go to support religion, right? That's what would happen under this other, which, I'm so glad you kind of went through the founding period. This idea of public support for religion was completely out of favor by the founders, right? That was their experience in the established colonies where you had government support for religion. They intentionally disestablished religion. So this whole move, and aided and abetted by a U.S. Supreme Court that has really, I think, changed the meaning of the First Amendment in some of their recent cases, has allowed that to happen. But until you completely privatize education, they're trying to Christianize public education. And they do that by pushing Christian nationalism in the public schools. And one reason, kind of to that point of the Dunbar quote, when Christian nationalism is measured in the population, the younger you are, the less likely you are to embrace Christian nationalism. And so if you are going to have a next generation who really makes a big push for Christian nationalism in the United States, you have to educate them into it. And so we see this by replacing an honest teaching of history, including an honest teaching of constitutional history, with this mythology of a Christian nation. We see it in content bans, whether it be in like Don't Say Gay bans or book bans. We see it with pushing of Bible in the curriculum, which I know we're going to drill down into. The school chaplain law that originated here in Texas, but that luckily has by and large not been implemented in Texas, but that bad idea has gone in other places. And then in just some of the symbolic moves, like requiring the posting of "In God We Trust" in every public school. Again, sending this message, this narrative of Christian nationalism, which is also a narrative of lack of belonging for everyone, right? It sends a message that to belong in public school, you have to believe in God. And not all children do, and not all families do. So it's an infringement on religious freedom. And many times they masquerade some of these ideas as saying, this is all about Judeo-Christian values, right? And you know, to be obvious, there is no such thing as a Judeo-Christian religion. And by using Judeo as a modifier here, it really cheapens Judaism as an independent religion. It takes Judaism and just uses it as a modifier in some way of Christianity. And then we also see it most recently in the state of Louisiana, which passed a law requiring the posting of the Ten Commandments in public schools. So it's a really concerted effort by groups like the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, by an organization called Mission Generation, by some of these, nonprofit organizations that are going around and pushing this legislation, not just here in Texas, but in states around the country.
I'll speak to the voucher issue. First of all, I want to say this. We had a period on this planet when the church ran the government. We call it the Dark Ages. So we've already tried this before, right? But the voucher issue in Texas, I mean, it's a nationwide approach as well. I mean, there's tons of states where they have vouchers, and some that they have universal vouchers. That means everybody gets it that wants it. Those are, by most terms, miserable failures. First of all, they bankrupt the states. I mean, Florida's got a $1.6 billion deficit because of their voucher program. Indiana, vouchers are often touted as the civil rights age or issue of our age. And yet in Indiana, 60% of voucher users are white kids. So that's not true either. Although vouchers do have a segregation background. In 1954, after Brown versus Board of Education, overruled Plessy v. Ferguson and separate but equal, we ended up with schools in the South creating segregation academies and trying to privatize their public schools so their kids didn't have to go to school with kids of another race. And so there is a racial component to all of this as well. And that shouldn't be ignored. It's not just, I want everybody to be a Christian like I am, my brand of Christianity. It's also, I don't want my kids going to school with kids of color. And that's a huge issue in the impetus behind all of this. So vouchers in Texas, we heard today from James Tallarico, a state representative from the Austin area, and James mentioned that vouchers, go back at least to 1957. But in earnest in Texas, and the Coalition for Public Schools was founded in 1995, because in earnest, since 1995, we have been opposing vouchers. And we've defeated vouchers time and time again through a coalition of rural Republicans and Democrats. So that's a bipartisan group, and that's what's kept Texas. We always have prided ourselves that Texas is not like Washington, D.C. It's not gridlocked, and we get along with each other. And yet every time we step towards Christian nationalism, we move closer to looking like Washington, D.C. and gridlocking our state. So we've had this voucher push over and over and over again, and for years, I've been doing this for about 15 years against vouchers, and for years, the approach was always the same. The schools are failing. And so we would always come with data, which is the bane of fundamentalism and Christian nationalism is data. So we would come with data and we would show, okay, well, here are the results in the schools. And overall, the schools are doing well, And public opinion is a weird thing with schools. I just want to say this, and that is that if you poll people and you say, how are schools nationwide? They get about a D. Well, how are schools in your state? Well, it's a C. How are schools in your town? It's a B. How are your schools in your neighborhood? It's an A. All of that cannot be correct, right? So you can't have a school that's getting an A and it's also, miserably failing. But that's public perception. But the data, they could never get the voucher passed because we had so much data to show that the schools were doing well. So they kind of pivoted to this culture war stuff, and Christian nationalism is front and center in that. And that is, critical race theory. That's some of the things Amanda mentioned already. All that to say, we have this pitched battle ahead of us in the legislature. This is occurring over and over again in other states, Florida, Indiana, Utah. I mean, you guys, there's a list of states that have these, and, it's killing them financially. And as far as the outcomes for the kids are concerned, it's not any better than they get in public education, and sometimes it's worse. So that's...
Thank you. So let's drill down into this Bible-infused curriculum proposal. What is it? What's driving it? Can you give us some examples?
Okay, I'll go ahead and take that one. And I looked at the proposed K through 5 curriculum materials at the behest of the Texas Freedom Network, and I know that one of the questions that was floated here for us to talk about is what resources are there for people who are interested in these issues. And the Texas Freedom Network has a long record of activism. It's a watchdog group based in Austin, and they have had their eye on public education for many years now. So they contracted with me to go through this proposed K through 5 curriculum over the summer. So I took a deep look at it. Took about a month of pretty much full-time work to go through all this stuff. And but I should mention that there was a period of public commentary. Amanda testified before the State Board of Education. Mark Chansey did. Many people testified criticizing the curriculum, pointing out errors and so on. And so there now is a revised version of the curriculum called the Blue Bonnet something or other. It's got a new name now, a Texas-y kind of name. And I have not had a chance to look at it closely yet. The spot check that I did a couple of days ago suggests that some of these errors some of these problems have not been corrected yet. So, but Texas Freedom Network has asked me to look at it again. So I may be doing that now. But I'm going to be talking about what was put out for public review in the summer of this year. So that little proviso. Another important point here: this curriculum is different from the way curriculum has been done in Texas in previous years. In the past, the State Board of Education was responsible for developing curriculum standards, which are called the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or TEKS. You may have heard about them. The State Board of Education develops those, and then it's up to outside publishers like Houghton Mifflin or Palgrave or other publishers like that to present textbooks for consideration in Texas that meet some percentage of those standards. Okay, and the nice thing about that is that Texas, Texas doesn't completely control those textbooks. Okay, so you have a lot of material that would also be available in New York State or California or Mississippi or wherever. This curriculum here is actually completely developed by contractors for the state of Texas. So this is an open resource curriculum that's been developed entirely for the state of Texas, and so that's different. This is basically a different kind of strategy now, and there are some positives to that approach, but there are also some dangers, and I'll mention some of the dangers here. This is just basically three major things that I found when I was looking through these materials. First of all, there is far too much emphasis on. Oh, and let me back up. This is kindergarten through grade 5. Okay, kindergarten through grade 5. So we have 6 grades accounted for here. It's reading and language arts. That's what we're talking about, the subject matter. So we're not talking about social studies, which is where a lot of religion coverage normally is, or American history or something like that. This is reading and language arts for little people. Okay, so there is in this, I found way too much emphasis on the Bible and Christianity, and by the Bible, I'm referring to basically the Christian Bible, okay, not the Tanakh, okay, but the Christian Bible, the Hebrew Bible plus the New Testament. There is very little coverage of other religions, and in some cases, no coverage of other religions. So that was one problem. So just to give you an example, students learn a whole lot about Christianity and the Bible, about the biblical creation and flood stories, the wisdom of King Solomon, Daniel in the lion's den, the life and miracles of Jesus, the Last Supper, the Good Samaritan, the Apostle Paul, and so on. These are the kinds of things that K through 5 students are learning about in the course of these 6 years. Other religions get far less coverage, if any. Judaism. And you may have noticed there, I mean, you recognize some of those names, right? They come from the Tanakh. But there is an interesting lack of coverage of Judaism after the biblical period. So basically from the Common Era forward, there's almost no discussion of Judaism. Basically, Judaism is relegated, the mentions of Judaism are relegated to the Holocaust, and that's about it. Okay, so it's basically what scholars often call biblical Judaism as opposed to rabbinic Judaism. That's what's covered. That's a very Christian way of thinking about the Bible. All right, so there's that. Judaism is covered only in the biblical period. There are only 3 brief mentions of Islam in this whole 6 years. Nothing on Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism, that is, religions that Texas students are likely to run across, right, if they're not Hindus or Buddhists themselves. Secondly, a second big problem, the 3rd grade curriculum in particular presents stories about Jesus's miracles and resurrection in ways that are not sufficiently couched as matters of faith. So they're presented kind of almost as if, not as historically accurate, but almost as if they were. So it would be very easy for 3rd grade kids to come away from these lessons with the idea that, oh yeah, Jesus rose from the dead, right? Or Jesus, healed these sick people and so on. This tells you the kind of this kind of Christianity that's going on here. most Christians disagree about the historical status of the miracle stories and so on. So there's a lot of disagreement within Christianity about these stories. This is a very kind of fundamentalist, literalist kind of approach to the Bible that is reflected here. The third problem, the authors appear to go out of their way to work into the curriculum detailed Bible lessons, even when they're both unnecessary and unwarranted. I'll give you two brief examples. One, in a kindergarten unit, which is supposedly about art appreciation, they devote an entire lesson to the creation and flood stories from the Bible, from the biblical book of Genesis. And then one of the things they quiz the students on is the order in which things were created. Okay, so what was created first is this. What was created second? This is art appreciation, right? Or is it? That's the question. Secondly, the second example, and then I'll stop. In grade 5, there's a discussion of Leonardo's magical work, the Last Supper, the fresco, the Last Supper. And it includes lengthy quotes from the Gospel of Matthew, from the Christian New Testament, and quotes that are far longer than are justified by the lesson itself. So it's very easy to look at these lessons and suspect that these are just ways of smuggling in biblical content and Christian content into otherwise primary school curriculum. And so this is basically a very kind of distorted curriculum in this sense, and there are so those are real problems that many people have pointed out besides myself as well.
Hello. Okay, so the rebel in me wants to know, what if a teacher receives this curriculum and is like, I'm not doing this? What happens?
Well, so before I get to that point, in order for the teacher to receive that curriculum, their school district is going to have to choose that curriculum for them. So where we are, and maybe can I do where we are in the process, and then I'll get so this curriculum was proposed by the Texas Education Association earlier this summer. There was a period of public comment, which was in mid-August. Then there was public testimony before the State Board of Education in mid-September. I will tell you, both the public comment and the testimony far outnumbered people like us opposed to the curriculum than people testifying for the curriculum. In the public comment, 10-1. 2,000 comments against it, only 200 for it. And at the day we were at the State Board of Education, I think at least 3-1 people there against it. So it's a very unpopular program, and the people of Texas are letting our elected State Board of Education members know that. And you can still let them know that, because they are not voting on whether to accept the revised curriculum until the week of November 18th. And so if you do one thing after leaving here, I hope you will go home and write your State Board of Education member and express your concerns about the proposed curriculum. If the State Board of Education adopts this, then the fight moves to all 1,200 school districts in the state of Texas, because every school district in the state of Texas will have to vote on whether to adopt this curriculum. Here's the really cynical piece. They get a financial incentive if they choose this curriculum over other curriculums. $60 per student, which, as we were talking about earlier, they have already underfunded public schools, so that is going to be a really attractive incentive for school districts. But there are still other ways for us to fight them accepting this curriculum. So what happens if your school district then adopts this curriculum? I don't think you're going to get in trouble for not reading the curriculum, but you're kind of put in a bind because you don't have other materials. These are the materials that you are given in your classroom in order to lead lessons. I personally think, given education freedom in this state, that each teacher can decide how they run their classrooms, but their students are still going to be tested on what's being taught in the curriculum. And so it puts them in a really difficult position. And most of our advocacy is focused on the impact of kids, but think about being a teacher in the school district when you're like given this script, which reads like a Christian Sunday school, and teaching the kids in Texas this. And one more piece just to kind of really outline how outlandish this whole curriculum is, because I'm on a mission. A lot of people in the country have heard about what's happening in Oklahoma with the curriculum. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads because that state school superintendent has like really upped the rhetoric and is being really kind of very strident about putting the Bible in the curriculum. But there's actually not a lot of teeth in what's going on there. And it's on the it's on the secondary level, right? It's a different, but this is elementary school and this is actually like a script. But the price tag for this bill was $713 million was spent to develop this curriculum. And the state, this is from reporting from an online education outlet called The 74. They found that the actual mainline publishers, the people who actually do textbooks, the state of Texas went to them and said, we want to do a curriculum that includes Bible stories, and they told them they would not do it. And so then they went to Hillsdale College, which is this real outpost of Christian nationalism, and worked with Hillsdale College as well as the ultra-conservative Texas Public Policy Foundation to write this curriculum. So we know where the curriculum comes from, we know what the aims are, but it's really up to us as the electorate to try everything we can to stop it from being implemented.
So I want to speak just a second to what she said about the folks who opted out of writing the curriculum. That was Amplify, I believe. Amplify this is going to tell you who wouldn't touch it. Amplify used to be owned by Rupert Murdoch. And then he sold it to Steve Jobs' wife. So these are the folks who wouldn't touch the curriculum. So anyway, that tells you something. Now, just as a parent, I'm taking off all my other hats and just talking to you as a parent and as a tax-paying citizen. First of all, whenever I first heard that, there was a bill out there to try to get chaplains acting as counselors, I was appalled by that, because I don't want my kid. I've had 4 kids go through public schools here in Texas. I never would have wanted any of those kids, and I don't want my grandkids to be, having an issue, go to a counselor and hear that they might be demon-possessed or some other weird thing from somebody of that ilk, of belief. I know that sounds a little exaggerative, but I don't know that it is. Then the second thing is, at the same time, I would never want a teacher. When I was a teacher, I would never want to be put in the position. I was bivocational. I was pastoring a church and teaching school, but I never would have wanted to be put in the position of trying to train school children up in a religion. And that's what this is. These folks are not, first of all, they're not qualified to do it, and they don't want to do it. And it doesn't even sound like, Amanda, that the people of Texas want it.
One point, too. What we've talked about the effect on the students, we've talked about the possible effect on teachers, and think about, as far as teachers go, one thing that occurred to me when I was reading through this was, what would a Hindu teacher, a 5th grade teacher, say about, how would a Hindu teacher feel about presenting something from the Gospel of Matthew in basically an art appreciation, something like that. But another group that we also should consider are parents as well. There are one of the nice things, the positive things about this curriculum is that they include letters to parents for each one of the units in the curriculum. Great idea. Some of them say, in this lesson, your kids are going to be learning about blah, 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 right? But in many cases, in the cases that I mentioned here, they give the parents no heads up that they're going to be learning from, they're going to be learning about the book of Genesis in the Bible, or they're going to read, they read passages from the Gospel of Matthew. So it's a very deceptive, underhanded kind of presentation of this material in terms of how it's presented to the parents in particular. So that's another problem with this. Now that may be corrected in this revised version. Many people mentioned that problem besides my report, but that may be corrected. We'll see. We'll have to see how that goes. But parents are another concern here.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give you one more question about actionable tips. What is it that...
And at the same time, this is your opportunity now to write any questions you like on the card that you picked up when you walked in. And we have some helpers walking around with the card. Anything, whatever we have time for, we will ask. So yeah, what can we do about this?
Yeah. Okay, great. So I mentioned some of the advocacy that happened with the curriculum this summer. And that was organized by a large group of organizations, and NCJW was part of our larger coalition, Texas Freedom Network, Baptist Joint Committee, and Christians Against Christian Nationalism, Texas Impact, ADL Texas, some of the other Jewish groups that are involved across the state. We did some training for people about how to read the curriculum, how to file comments, because they don't make it easy. I was so pleased that 2,000 people filed comments because it's really difficult to figure out even the system and then to go testify. And so I would say sign up to get email updates from any or all of those groups, because as we move through the next stages of work, we will be reaching out with additional training opportunities. I hope that we are able to defeat this on the week of November 18th. I am also a realist, and I sat there and watched kind of how hardcore some of these State Board of Education members are, and how some of the more moderate members were very quiet during the hearings. And so I'm just not sure which way they're going to go. So if we lose, then we will be going to the State Board, to every school district. And so be sure that you are in touch with NCJW, of course, but also I'd ask if you'd get involved with BJC and all of our groups, because we will be organizing, particularly here in North Texas, to try to cover every school district in this area. Because even if they're going to adopt this curriculum, we want to be sure that they hear the opposition. Baptist Joint Committee, and you can find us online at bjconline.org. You can sign up to get our updates there, and we will be in touch about advocacy opportunities on this topic.